Good evening. Welcome to Street Talk. My name is Dominic Cotton. Unfortunately, Father Russ isn't with us this evening. He unfortunately has been sick this week, and so he needed a little time away from the TV show over here as we're doing a taping in Seymour. Tonight, I have an excellent show. I have a good friend of the disability community who's here with us today, who's been part of the IDD, or Intellectually and Developmentally Disabled Caucus, was actually a founding member of it. He's the representative from up in the 63rd District, Representative Jay Case.
Hey.
Jay, so glad to finally get you on here.
Our schedules just haven't connected.
Well, you know, I know how difficult it is being a legislator, and I know I first met you was actually at the end of one of our I call long battles with the Department of Social Services, which I think we caused a lot of trouble up at the legislature, and they were all running around a little crazy afterwards. And I know you and I walked out at the very end of that after that long day, and obviously I didn't know how involved you were in the disability community. I knew you were on the Human Service Committee at the time, and you know, obviously I've gotten to know you over the last year and a half. You're also on the Environmental Committee, and you're on the Intern Committee with another good friend of ours, Teresa Conroy.
Oh yeah.
You're the ranking member over on that. And obviously, the more I've gotten to know you, the more I've seen your face around within this, the more I've had the opportunity to see how much advocacy and how much what I call heart, you know, that you really put into helping others really understand what it's like to go through and have disabilities, because I think as we spoke before, it's difficult because a lot of people don't know what it's like to be in the day of somebody who has a developmental disability, a brain injury, or mental health issues. Everybody kind of looks at it from the outside, and they look at the budget numbers, and they don't necessarily understand what those translate into. Yeah.
Well, Dominic, you know, and I appreciate you having me down here tonight, and it's an eye-opening experience living a day in the life of somebody with a disability. And you and I, since you have learned a little bit more about me, I have a brother who has intellectual and developmental disabilities, who I've been working with over the summer, you know, with a bunch of hospital visits and, you know, working with him in rehab and then trying to find new placement for him. And, you know, yourself going through a few things, you know, until you live it, it's very difficult to understand why those monies and where those monies go and how they're effective to the intellectual developmental disabilities population in the state of Connecticut. You know, we talk about intellectual developmental disabilities. You know, we have the autism spectrum, we have the traumatic brain injuries, we have, you know, mental health issues, we have homeless issues, you know, and we have our seniors here in the state of Connecticut. You know, and I look at it every day when I go into an appropriations meeting, or I go into a human services meeting or an IDD caucus. You know, these are our people of the state of Connecticut, and they're our most vulnerable who don't have a voice. And what I mean is they don't have a voice. It usually takes somebody else to speak for them. And there are a lot of families out there who just don't have the ability. You know, it takes a special knack for someone like yourself as a parent to come in and actually speak. A lot of parents aren't up for that.
Well, I know. I was with a friend of mine who's got a daughter, and she has brain injury and a severe seizure disorder, and she's gone through multiple hospitalizations because, you know, she might have issues like with her liver, where all of a sudden one medication doesn't seem to work, and she can't find the service providers to be able to provide all of the services that she's allotted, and and she has to go and she has to provide some of those services for her daughter. And it's not that, you know, she doesn't want to do that, but it does take away from her opportunity to have a normal life, to have friends. Quite often, you know, people who have disabilities, you know, with brain injury, they lose their friends after their brain injury, and family members do too, because a lot of people don't understand the, you know, sometimes they have to break, you know, appointments or break times that they would socially get together with people because their son, their daughter's, you know, going through a crisis and they have to go in a hospital.
Yeah. Well, Don, growing up, I'll step back a few, and how this really interacted with me is growing up. My brother is the oldest. On the 13th, he'll be 50. He, at the age of 4, had a brain tumor the size of a grapefruit. They removed that portion of his brain, so he was left with a quarter of his brain. The doctors gave him to the age of 7. He lived, at the time, it was Newington Children's Medical Center, which is now CCMC down in Hartford. But he lived there for 7 years. Luckily enough, my father had a decent job where they said, go take care of your son and come back as long as, you know, you get your work done. He was at Cigna for 38 years, and they were just wonderful with him. And today's day and age, you really don't see that a lot with corporations, you know, kicking into the family life. But anyways, you know, they gave him to the age of 7. My sister was born, she's the middle, and then I'm the youngest. So I had the opportunity to share a room with my brother because he was a seizure patient. Well, I learned about seizures at a very young age, you know, and how to take care of them and how to work with them. And, you know, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and have to, you know, help get him out of it, or wake up mom and dad and, you know, and make things happen. Well, make a full circle here. The age of 7 passed. His brain started growing back. He went to King Philip School in West Hartford, where they had a program for special needs. At that time, Litchfield County Association of Retarded Citizens, LARC, which is a part of ARC, came out to King Philip and worked with the transition period with my parents. And as soon as he became the age of 21, because you have from the age of 18 to 21 to transition out, which is a program that we're working to try to educate more parents on, because it's hard for them to grasp, and it's hard for us to get the programs associated with the schools so that we can do this transition period. But ever since then, he went to LARC, and he did their day services and then got a job. It wasn't until later in life, when my father passed away in 1996, where my brother needed to go out into housing. Just because we didn't want him to see my father failing and the way it was. But before the year before my father passed, 1995, my brother happened to be a gold medalist in the 1995 Special Olympics World Games.
Wow.
And I think that was the plateau for my father, where he said, you know, I've lived it. This is it. And he got that gold medal because he had a very good coach. So, and the coach really taught him how to do things. And yes, I was the coach. So but, you know, so I went off to college at Northeastern University, and I studied human services and families with special needs. You know, growing up, it was, as you stated earlier, you know, in my family, it was my sister and I who gave up every other weekend so the parents could go out and have a good time or go out to dinner. So we gave up our high school years like every other weekend because they needed a break and they needed a life. It was almost like respite, you know, except it was done within the family. And, you know, it's very hard also on a family to relinquish or to put your sibling or in what we're seeing in Hartford, your grandson or granddaughter, into independent living or into a group home facility, because once they leave you, it's, you know, it's very difficult for the parents. You know, I saw that this past summer when my brother was having a few issues, and we spent a few weeks in Hartford Hospital, and I spent the nights there sleeping on a cot. And Mom would come in and spend the days there because, you know, you were concerned the hospital really doesn't know his disability and how to treat it or how to work with it, you know, with certain things that are happening. So we felt it was best that a family member was there. And it never ended. When he went to rehab, my mother was there 12 hours a day until she felt comfortable that she could leave in the evening. And it was very taxing and very difficult, but we all changed our schedules to try to make things work as a family. And then when we did find placement for him in an ICF home, an independent care facility, where they have nurses 24/7, there's only 6 people in the house, 6 clients in the house. He comes from a CHH home, which is, you know, it's a family, but they don't have the medical care. And in his disability, we felt as though the medical care was needed. And, you know, when we left there and dropped him off, you know, my mother was upset. It took some time for her, you know, she had sleepless nights, so did I, you know.
It's those tough decisions that I think a lot of people don't understand. And what you were talking about with your father is almost that point where you say to yourself, look, I know my son's safe. It's like I can leave the earth. And this is everybody, and this is community, and goes across the board, all disabilities. This is their greatest fear, is they come to the end, they don't know what's going to happen with their child. Your brother is extremely fortunate. He has somebody that's been involved with him and cares so much about him throughout his whole life. But they're looking towards, well, who's going to be there to protect my son? Who's going to be there to protect my daughter? Who's going to be there to be able to advocate for him? And that's such a gut-wrenching thing that I know, like a lot of people say, well, you know, I got to stay like healthy, because if I don't stay healthy, who's going to be here to like make sure like my son or daughter's taken care of?
Well, you know, and that's one of the reasons in working, you know, together with Senator Bai and Representative Hampton and myself as the 3 co-chairs of the Intellectual Developmental Disability Caucus. My mission in the caucus and our mission is we're 68 members strong.
68 out of how many legislators? There's 153.
We got some work to
somewhere
do.
In there.
We have some work to do, but we were surprised with the numbers that we got.
That's why I'm saying I'm shocked at the amount that you did get in.
Yep, and you know, is to teach legislators or introduce legislators to the disabilities world and what it's all about and what the funding is there for and why we need to continue on. Because, as I mentioned before, the IDD, the autism spectrum, TBI, traumatic brain injury, mental health, you know, homeless has become a big thing now, and especially our seniors. They are all residents of the state of Connecticut. And I feel very strongly about this, is we need to take care of our own, or we're going to be costing ourselves more and more. The services that DDS offers and DSS offers, if you can get through to the right channels to get the services, they're really preventative services. And we need to work harder to use those preventative services to get the people into permanent situations. So getting back to the IDD caucus is, you know, trying to let legislators know that when, and I try to set this straight when we start a meeting, when parents come in and they testify or they talk or they have questions, they're going to be passionate. They're going to be yelling. They're going to be, you know, and I try to calm the parents down, saying, hey, you know, we're here to listen to you, so that the legislators who aren't too sure about the different disabilities, they get to learn what's going out there. I was talking to a few legislators last night on the phone. Yes, our job doesn't stop at the end of session.
No.
We go right through and year round. And I was offering up, you know, for them to come out and have a day in my brother's life. And I would, you know, more than willingly set up, whether if it's in their district, where my brother lives now, find an ARC or find a family that would allow us to do that, and let them live the life of a disabled child. I think that is going to be the greatest impact, because until you live it, you don't get it.
Well, I think a lot of people look at people, and they put their disability out front first, and they don't look at them as a person, and realize. I know for my son, he hangs out with my clients because we go and do things together, and he's been involved in their life. And like I said, we went up to go see a friend of mine who I hadn't seen for like a good year and a half, and we've been heavily involved in this. And he put together a little storyboard with his stickers, and wrote like a whole little story, and he gave it to her, and he sat there and played video games next to her. And to me, that's the beauty of my son is he sits there and he's with people, and he'll ask oh, okay, what do you get a wheelchair for, and they'll answer, and that's it. And then it's like, oh, can you come play with me, or can we play like the video games together? He doesn't say, oh, you have traumatic brain injury, you're developmentally disabled. He just looks at him as a person, and I think that's the big piece that's missing within some of these.
It is, and there's some really good stories out there, and some funny stories. I'll tell you a couple funny stories about the quirks with my brother. Growing up, we lost cable, and he loves his game shows, and at the time it was Mr. Rogers. So my mother decided, that was back when we had the videotapes, and she was putting them in and recording so that when there was no cable, something went out, she could play them. So she decided at one time to start playing Mr. Rogers and putting the Mr. Rogers tapes in, and so they were playing over and over the Mr. Rogers tapes. Well, what does Mr. Rogers do when he first usually comes into his show and start up? He goes and feeds his fish. So after 12 episodes, my brother's fish got fed 12 times. So you ultimately know they're all floating at the top the next day because they were overfed, and we were trying to figure out what went on. And I says, Mom, what did you do? What was he watching? And I says, aha. So then the other day when he was in the rehab, we had secured him with a special button because part of his problem was he was getting up in the middle of the night, losing control of his left side and falling because he wanted to get up and use the restroom because he likes to be independent as possible. So now we got a red button that he pushes, and he moves to the side of the bed and puts his legs off, and he waits for somebody to give him a hand. And most disabled people or intellectually disabled people are trainable. So we trained him on that. And we go in one day, and he says, yeah, he's trained on that red button. He pressed it at 2 o'clock in the morning. We were all worried. We went in. He wasn't sitting at the side of the bed. He was just laying down, looking up. He says, Scott, what's wrong? I says, I just like a couple pretzels, please. So he thought it was like a call button for room service. So I says, well, we got to stop that one. So we have some really good times. We have some really good family memories. I could tell you stories after working with Special Olympics in their development department down in Hamden. I've worked with it day in and day out. I know all types of disabilities. It's my mission to work on the human services side and appropriations to see that we take care of our most vulnerable in the state of Connecticut. And that's one of the reasons I was really excited on coming down here and being on your show and seeing the more we get this across the state, the better off we are. And we are working to get more legislators from all 4 corners of the state to come to Hartford to bring their families so that they can get involved. Because, we do get large numbers there when we have a caucus. I think our Families Day sort of blew the mind of, I know it did, of Capitol Police. A good thing I warned them ahead of time. But, I think there's over 400 families. We had 1 room booked, and we ended up taking up 4 rooms. So, and we had the large rooms, so it was quite impressive day at the legislative office building, and we heard a lot of things. And you know, you can never stop hearing stories of what's going on. You know, when you sit at home, and I know you're the same way, Dominic, that phone is always on and by my side. Back in the day, we didn't have that, but now it's the staff is just a phone call away, and when you see that number come up, you're like,
oh, I have it with my son, because my son's got a genetic disorder.
Right.
He doesn't process fat, and the first day he went into school, they didn't follow the plan, and he ended up being hospitalized, and you know he passed out from lack of energy going through his system because of it. So we put into place, you know, he has a one-on-one parent now when he goes to eat, to make sure that he does eat, and they take pictures. But I know for me, and I say this for a lot of other people, we go through almost like post-traumatic stress disorder every time, you know, the family member ends up in a situation where you're going and you're being hospitalized, and it's sometimes a very isolated world because not everybody understands what you're going through at the time. And I know, I mean, obviously my way to deal with things is I get on top of legislators.
Oh, I know.
to get them involved with what's going on, because if I see something that happens within my family, you know, I don't just want it fixed for my family. I want it fixed for the system to be able to say what's wrong.
You and I both, we want to make sure that we can work on the system and make sure it works for all. You know, I'll give you another example, you know, which is many out there with intellectual and developmental disabilities. You know, my brother went to work one day, and he had dropped his thermos. Well, when he got home, the house mother had opened up his thermos to clean it. And those old style thermoses had glass inside.
Glass in them, yeah.
Well, my brother ate all his soup and everything that was in it, and all the glass. My brother, he doesn't feel hurt, pain, doesn't have tear ducts, doesn't feel hot and cold. So rushed him to the emergency room, and luckily enough, the glass shattered into small enough pieces where everything passed, and nothing was, you know. But those phone calls that you get, and whether it's me, my mom, my sister, you know, we're right there with him, whether he is with his house family that's hosting him, that's taking care of him. But, you know, he's in a new facility right now, and he had a doctor's appointment the other day, but my mom insists on going and pick him up and taking him. If staff wants to come, staff is more than willing to come, but my mom's not giving that up. You know, my mom takes him to get his hair cut. My mom takes him to the dentist. But that's the motherly loving it. Yeah, and she
never going to stop.
She doesn't want to lose that
no.
aspect of it, and you know, she wants to, you know, help him to buy his clothes, and because she knows how they fit. She knows where she has to have him tailored because he's 4 feet tall, but he's a 50-year-old man. You know, if I call him a kid, he'll let me know that he's a man. You know, it's. That's one of the real main reasons, Dominic, that I decided to run for office, amongst others. But, you know, it's our most vulnerable in the state of Connecticut that we have to learn to take care of. Yeah, do we have roads? Yes, we have infrastructure issues. But darn it, you know, we got to find a way. You know, the pet projects and the different things that are taking place, you know, yes, we do need to keep Connecticut moving into the 21st century and keep things updated so we don't fall behind. But, you know, falling behind on somebody's life, to me, is a little bit worse. And especially since they don't have the voice to speak for themselves, you know, we we worked last session on the TBI waivers, waiver 1 to waiver 2, and we found out, you know, waiver 1 and waiver 2. We found out a couple weeks ago when we had a couple months ago when we had appropriations meeting. We were called back in to make some minor adjustments because the waivers weren't meeting the federal standards. And I had mentioned that when we were going from waiver 1 to waiver 2, and you know, but it was a cost savings deal at the time in the budget.
It was a complicated cost savings.
It was, and I know I spoke heavily on it because, you know, I think we had 76 on the waiver list to get waivers, and we took care of 70, or no, we took care of 60. And I said, so what are we going to do with the other 16?
I remember very well.
And that hit me very hard because I believe, and I asked it on the House floor when we were voting for it, you know, we wanted to save $6 million. And I says, how much more is it going to cost to get these other 16 people services? And it was somewhere in the realm of less than 100,000 or 150,000. I says, well, you know, let's save $5.7 million and let's get everybody the services that they deserve. You know, those are the type of hard decisions, but we were still saving money.
Well, there was another rub that went along with that, and that was the reason this came down like a freight train was there was a federal lawsuit that was out there because Department of Mental Health Addiction Services had been warehousing people with mental health issues in nursing homes. They didn't give them a way to be able to say, oh, if you get to this point, then we'll get you back out into the community. They were using the nursing homes as warehouses, and so they had to have not just the budget savings, but they had to have the placements for all these DEMAS people to come out into the community, which is why there was such a focus from that end. But I mean, in the moments of it, you don't know these things. I mean, when we're in there and we see, like, you know, the governor's office coming down, and you know they know that they're in a tough spot because we're making the good case because we met with the commissioner, with the lieutenant governor, with a ton of legislators on this issue, but they had to deal with, you know, twisting the arms in order to realize that this was going to get voted on no matter what. And you know, I'm fortunate. Father Russ is with me. You know, when he had people who were telling him, you know, that were high up, that said they're twisting our arms to like vote on it. One of them was actually crying at the fact that she was like, "I got to vote against you," and you know, I had my senator coming to me, who we'd been working on this for a long period of time, Gail Schlossberg, who was head of the committee at the time, and she was offering everything, you know, to try to get this on the face of the earth. And you know, I talked to Russ. He's like, "Well, get whatever you can." So we're in there. You know, some things we realized after the fact they couldn't change on a waiver, even if they were trying to put it into legislation. Some of the specific wording of it. But it's difficult when you have all that going on and you don't know all the other pieces that are happening, and that is, you know, that is part of politics. Is there's conflicting interests that you would think things would be like a no-brainer on. They're not. They're not. It is complicated.
Well, and you know, that's, my phone rings every day, or my emails are through the roof, which is good, because when I'm out there speaking to the public, especially in my district, is I let them know that you elect a legislator to represent you in Hartford, and they are there for you. And you know, this morning I was working on trying to help out a family who's having some issues, and to get DSS involved, and you know, we have our legislative liaisons at DSS that we can get to, and we can try to work and get things solved. Is that the right way? You know, it's the way things work, you know, but we got to get to more people in the disabilities area to realize that they need to reach out to their their representative, and I've always told people if their representative isn't responsive, I'm always willing to take it on, and then I have to contact the representative's office, and if they don't take it on, then I take it on myself and try to get the people what they need. Because, you know, like you said, government can be so complicated. Government is so large right now. Mm-hmm. We're the largest employer in the state of Connecticut, and, you know, nothing against, you know, the state workers. They're doing the best they can with the resources they have. And when I mean resources, I don't just mean financial resources. I mean how they're educated on what they have to use, because when you go to some offices, they don't even realize some of the services that we offer. And, you know, education is number one. And going back to the Intellectual Disabilities Caucus is education. You know, we need to educate the parents, you know, because they're like, well, you know, I'm 70 and, you know, I still have my grandson with me, and, you know, but we're not a priority, and we don't have housing, and we're getting concerned for his life. And, you know, those are the things that hit me really hard. And you know, we had a meeting the other day, and you know, just some of the things that the actual disabled people who are able to talk and able to come up and speak in front of people, the things that they say are just, you know, it's the truth, and it's coming from them. And, you know, when I try to speak, you know, it comes from the heart. You know, I'm not going to throw out facts. I'm not going to throw out numbers. We work with all the numbers. We sit down, you know, we go over them. But when it comes down to it, comes down to common sense, Dominic. You know, and common sense is take care of your neighbors, you know, work with them. I mean, there was a bill on the floor which, you know, I had a good discussion with a representative on the other side of the aisle on the House floor. You know, they're studying now on whether to allow the municipalities to say where you can put housing for disabilities. I totally think that's discrimination. Totally. I was totally against it. You know, what's to say that you or I don't come down with a disability, and are we not going to be able to live where we live? Well, that, to me, that is
that was one of the things that I said at that first public hearing that we had. You know, this can happen to anybody, and that's the difference of brain injury over some of the other disabilities. Is, you know what, it can happen to anybody, and it did happen, and I know that had an effect on people, because I was right there in the Senate galleries when that legislature walked, you know, back in under his own, you know, power, and, you know, took his oath and everything else, and how, you know, much emotion was like in that room to see somebody, you know, come back after that situation. And I saw him later on in the session, and we actually do know him pretty well.
I just saw him the other day in the legislative office building.
And he was, you know, I got to talk to him for a couple minutes, and, you know, told him that, you know, we're always behind you, we always support you, and, you know, we were talking back and forth. I could see he made a lot of progress.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's, you know, that's the same opportunities that other people should be afforded and realized.
I had a unique opportunity when I was working for Special Olympics, and it was summer games, and I had a close neighbor who had a problem with a child who needed to do some community service. And I says, you know, have him come with me for the weekend at summer games. We can knock off a bunch of hours. And, you know, rough kid, you know. I had to get him cleared so he could be in there. But, you know, I put him in a golf cart, and he was going around and making sure all the water was full around the venues and stuff like that. And he had somebody with him who had special needs, helping him. And, you know, those are long days when you're working, you know, the 12, 14-hour days. And 8-10 hours are up, and I can't find the kid. I'm like, well, what the heck? I keep calling him. And 12 hours later, after he's out there, he's cleaning up and he's working with athletes. I said, on the ride home, I was like, so how'd it go? He says, I have a totally different aspect. I says, what's the deal? He says, I met special needs people who weren't born that way. I met some people who were in car accidents, some people who had traumatic brain injuries. And he says, can I come back tomorrow? And I was like, I thought I was going to get a lot of resistance, but it made me feel good because it just opened up one more eye. If you can just keep opening up one more mind, that's a win-win. My father always taught me, there's no such thing as problems, they're just challenges. So if you can get through the challenges, you're doing quite well. And we just need to get there. And stop the political banter back and forth. And when we talk about the hospitals, and the hospitals are getting cut, which I don't want to get into too much, but that's where a lot of our families end up with. It's almost our safety blanket, because they're going to need that care at some point.
There has to come a point where different communities don't feel pitted against each other, and I hate to put it into that perspective. I do know a lot of the history. I know one of the big things that people are looking at are Southbury Training School, and they're saying, this is a huge cost. It's the reason it's still open is because of a lawsuit back in the mid-'80s, which basically said they're not going to put new people in there, but everybody that's there is going to age out. And, people with disabilities, they have a long life. It's not, necessarily that people are going to pass away at a young age. So, it's almost like you're running two situations side by side. You have everybody who's looking and saying, we need the services, and then we have these people that were guaranteed this over this, and why can't we just shut this down and move the monies over here? And I forget who it was, but I remember watching through on CTN, and he made a very good speech about this, and he said, he'd been through this discussion before. Part of the difficulty is, and I know this personally because I've actually set up a facility that was meant to take people out of Connecticut Valley Hospital for DEMAS, and you had to run two side-by-side things going on at the same time. And the state paid out, I think, probably, not the full amount, but probably about 50% of it to be able to set it up, get the staff in place, get the management in place, and get things up and running so that, we could be able to get those people out of Connecticut Valley Hospital and into the placement. And once the placement was up and running, things were all good. I know they shrunk down, I think, one of their long-term units because of that. But it's a lot of complexities in order to get those things in place. I've never been through Southbury Training School. I guess my understanding is they have a huge campus. I think they've tried to shrink down as much of it as possible, but, it's a great expense. There's not an easy answer to fixing all of that. And that's, I think, where sometimes the public has difficulty with understanding how complicated some issues can be. And some other issues, I think, are a lot simpler, like what we were talking about, which happened with the ABI. And, okay, you're saving this amount, maybe save a little less and, help all these families that have been waiting out. The reason that I took or I pushed for that deal that day, and I did get a lot of flack from my own community for it, them not knowing all the pieces that went into it, was I knew that they were coughing up, I think it was $500,000 or $1 million to eliminate 15 people who'd been waiting for those services at some of them for 3 or more years. And I watched, because what I do is I go and try to get the whole picture of it. And I watched the appropriations meetings on the last time they re-upped the waivers. And I watched this family, and they're coming in and they're saying, you know, the only way to get our loved one, who we pulled out of a nursing home, onto the waiver at the time, was for them to have to go back into the hospital.
You have to. A lot of places you can't get placements unless you're coming out of a medical facility. You know, there was an interesting thing that I learned about in a board meeting the other night, or a few months ago at a board meeting. We had 3, I want to say elderly, but you know, in their 80s, special needs women who, they all knew each other, but this one group decided to get them out into a living situation. This one woman, you know, she was getting ground food in the nursing home. They were just, because they didn't, you know, the special needs didn't know how to deal with her. They moved her into this condo, which the ARC in my area owns, and this woman's now eating regular food. She's gained her weight back, and she's back into health and society. Well, there was another woman in there, and she had bone disorder where she lost all the cartilage in her bones, and she was in a lot of pain, so it was pain med. Well, they took her to a podiatrist, I guess it is, or a special doctor that, you know, looked at the bone structure and whatever, and gave her cortisone shots, and she gets those every 6 months, so she's up and walking now. And she doesn't need the pain meds. And there's a third woman, I'm not quite sure of what her issue is, but the 3 of them do things together within that one home, and they're out of the nursing home facility. And you know, it's it's nothing to say bad about a nursing home facility, but I don't think it's a place for people who have special needs, who can actually go out there and be productive people, and actually live a life and live their golden years, you know, the way they want to. You know, whenever I see my brother, I always say, "Are you okay? Are you happy?" And you know, are your days going okay? You know, he's in a day program now instead of working in the day program. He's doing, you know, physical therapy and a few other things with him, and you know, he's happy. You know, and it's I've never seen him not happy. He doesn't know when he's sick what's going on, but the bottom line, Dominic, and I think you and I talked about it, you know, October 28th is the next IDD caucus at 10 a.m. in room 2E of the Legislative Office Building. And we're having OFA, Office of Fiscal Analysis, which is a bipartisan group, come in and let us know where we stand, how the last quarter went, so people can understand how the monies are being spent, where they're being spent. And I know there'll be a lot of questions, but it's so that the legislators that come in, and believe it or not, if the legislators aren't there, we have them taped by, they're live on CTN.
Yep.
So the legislators are know that, and they're either in their offices watching them doing something that they need to get done, or they will watch it at a later date, because a lot of us, we can't get to everything, and believe it or not, it won't surprise you, but it'll surprise a lot of other people out there. We really use CTN as a tool, because some of the things that we can't get at, we go ahead and watch. And you know, there's a meeting going on this past afternoon, which I couldn't get at, with DCF was coming in to discuss different things. And
yeah, there's another hot button issue right there. I got a lot to say about that. That's actually my Thursday TV show. I got Robin Porter coming on, and that's one of the things that we're certainly going to discuss.
And you know, and that's a big issue. And I always say, because I'll always look, because I serve on a bunch of subcommittees of appropriations, and I say this to special needs parents too, if you want to come and complain, if you're going to bring a negative, you better have a positive to back it up. If we don't have if the positive doesn't actually work for us, at least we know that you're working to try to help us out to make a change and make the change positive. I don't agree with people who just come in and negative. Well, we don't have all the answers ourselves. We don't know how to make all those answers or how to fix everything that's going on. We're just policymakers, and sometimes
you can't be experts in every single different facet of things.
That's why there's so many disabilities out there and people in need. And you and I were talking earlier, and I spent last week, Thursday and Friday, out in the woods in the northwest corner looking for homeless people, and finding encampments. So, it was pretty interesting. I mean, we trucked through the woods with a staff of about 8 or 10 of us, and the way people live, it's disheartening. But those are our people. Mm-hmm. And the bottom line is, whether you're homeless, you're special needs, you're in a nursing home, you're not as fortunate to be out in the public as you and I are, and I'm sure you and I have our own issues that we work through on a daily basis in our minds. But we are all people of the state of Connecticut, and we all pay our dues and our taxes, and we need to take care of that.
And I know for me that stands as not just that I expect by legislature to do some of these things. I think people, if you look around, giving a helping hand up to different people. I know I have a friend of mine who he lives down in Florida. We spent our teen years together, and we managed to find each other. And he's letting me know he's got like a schizoaffective disorder, and he's been through a lot of different things. I talked with some other friends that that we all knew each other back as teenagers, and I'm like, well, let's get him up here. So I paid for his plane ticket.
You pay for a plane ticket for me to go to Florida?
If you really needed it that bad, Jay, sure. But I paid for his plane ticket to come up here because he hasn't seen his mom in 10 years. He lives in public housing. He's doing much better. He just went through like an episode where he lost his girlfriend, and he, ended up, going downhill. But he wants to feel, some of the camaraderie of all the people that we know. And, that's the wonderful thing about Facebook is you get to find all the people throughout your life that, you may have thought of falling off the earth. And yeah, I paid for the plane ticket. Another friend of ours is picking him up from the airport. Another one he's like, going to go stay with for a couple of days. We're going to have a big get together, and then somebody else is bringing him up to go see his mom, and another person's bringing him home.
But that's what friends and family are about.
Yeah.
I give you an example of how I grew up is, my father would always make sure that we would have 3 or 4 vacations a year. I couldn't do that today because it's not affordable. But, wherever we went, whether it was Keachie, Vermont, or into New Hampshire or wherever, there was no phones, there was no TV.
Yeah, it's not like today.
There was nothing. No, and he would make sure that wasn't. And to this day, my mother, if we go over to her house for dinner, it's leave your cell phone in the car. Mm-hmm. And, so she's trying to revert back to what we did. But, those are interesting times of playing board games, of doing puzzles, and trying to find other things that, after a day of skiing up in Vermont and coming home, and yeah, we were allowed to go down to the clubhouse and, use the weights and swim and do stuff like that. But, bringing the family back in, and our economy hasn't allowed for that. And our economy is making parents, 2 and 3 jobs. And, the more latchkey kids we have more troubles out there. So there's other facets to government that we need to look at in the public sector. And bottom line, I know you have a very close-knit family. I have a very close-knit family. And, we have to thrive on that because there's people out there who don't have family. I'm working with somebody right now who is alone. You know, he's 18 or maybe he's 20 now, but you know, he's lost his mother. He doesn't have a father. You know, and he's got some issues, and you know, it's not his fault.
Yeah.
And whatever I can do to help better his life or better the style that he lives, you know, I will do that. And you know, I do these things on Thanksgiving and Christmas. I go to the shelter and I serve them their holiday dinners. I give up my holidays to go do that. And people are always like, well, why? Why are you giving up your holidays? That's your time. You know, well, it's my time to give back, you know. It's my time I'm not in Hartford because it's actually shut down. So
one of the few times.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, we got an interesting short session coming up starting in January. We're all getting prepared for it. So I suggest anybody out there who has suggestions, has questions, to reach out to your legislator and say, what about this? Can you take up this? Can you look at this? And usually, you know, the short session the bills aren't about, it's funny you say bills, but they're not financially impacting to the budget because the budget is already set. Well, what budget we have.
Right. That's a different story.
That's a different story, but the budget is set in the first session, which is the long session.
They make minor adjustments.
Minor adjustments, but if you propose a bill, it's not supposed to impact financially the budget. So if I wanted to put a new bill through for X, Y, and Z, if it had a financial impact, it would be taken out during screening. But we try to do bills to better the state of Connecticut in other ways in the short session. But I think this is going to be a very interesting short session, and I think it'll be interesting public hearings that'll be coming up. You know, I've sat there till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning on the appropriations side, and you know, to hear the families, because I always feel as though if you know I'm elected to be there, I need to be there until the end. And I think that's very important because, you know, the first speaker who in one public hearing, you know, the first speaker is just as important as the last speaker. And last year I had the president of my local hospital. He was the first one to sign up, and it was a lottery. Well, the number he grabbed was the last one to speak. So you never know when it's going to be. So basically what I've asked for is when we have things that are going to be very controversial, whether it's human services, you know, special needs, or it's hospitals, let's break those up. Let's go A through N. You know, let's do half of the alphabet one day and half of the alphabet the next day. Because I'll be honest with you, when it comes down to it and you're sitting in there, I know you've sat there for many hours, and those aren't the most comfortable chairs you guys sit in.
No, they're not.
It's when you're there for 4 or 5 hours, and some people are there for 10, 12 hours, people start leaving. So let's end things before 11, 12 o'clock, because, you know, legislators do get tired too. And we do, what, 2.5 weeks of hearings where we're up there for all these hours. And, you know, it's part of our job. I love what I do. I love working with people like yourself because you get it. You know how to reach out. You know, when I see a Facebook comment from you,
I'm persistent. Is what I'm told.
Well, and you know what?
That's all right.
Persistence gets you where you need to be.
Sometimes I do take the flack. I know on the last public hearing, I went and saw some people from DSS, and you know, I went to go shake their hand, and they're like, well, we're not shaking your hand. I'm like, why? Well, you didn't follow through on your promise. And I'm going, what promise did I not follow through on? And they're like, well, you said you were going to come to me like if you had like questions about something. And it was because I went directly to Centers for Medicaid Services, and they heard about it from CMS. But that's my right as a citizen to go and look for the information. And I told her, I said, I'm not the only one that did this. And I said, I also went out line by line with that lady. And she's like, oh, yeah, I know. I'm like, but I'm looking at him like, that's what I got to do in order to be able to move the thing. If I just went to you and you said, well, that's not possible, what good would that be?
Yeah. Yeah. You know,
I know we're down, actually down, because I know 55 minutes goes real quick some days. So I want to give you the opportunity to, you know, if you want to reach out or talk to anybody in your
you know, all I can say is, you know, reach out to your local legislatures, because that's what we're here for. You know, my decisions in the legislature are basically made by people who write into me. They're not my personal agenda, not my personal decisions. I actually, you know, do look at my computer roster and how people have called in and how people have asked me to vote. And, you know, I try to see the numbers, and my staff works with me to try to get those numbers the proper way, because it's not my vote, it's my constituents' vote. Yeah. So if you're in there for the personal agenda, it's just not the right thing to do. And, you know, and if it's not a decision that I think is 100% correct, but I will make those calls and try to find out, you know, how to justify it with these people before I vote, and I'll take their vote, you know, and bring it home to the people. I have a 100% voting record for the past 3 years, and I don't vote just party lines. I vote for the bill that is up there, and for what it is, with its whatever it pertains to, and how my constituents have reached. When I see a bill that's coming up on the floor, whether it's you know, moving package stores to stay open on Sunday, extending their hours, I'm just using that one for an example. I'll reach out to my local package stores and say, how is this going to affect you? Yeah. You know, and you know, you always have those people on speed dial, and you know, your local superintendents, your police chiefs, your elected officials. You know, and you try to reach out to them to get as much information as possible. That's why you'll see a lot of people getting up and leaving the chamber and going out into the concourse and seeing how things are done.
People don't always get to see, like, sort of like what's behind the curtain and all the work that comes in. Sometimes they just see the public hearings.
I mean, we go into our caucus rooms, and believe it or not, the number of people who are on their phones just trying to make calls to see, you know, how this is going to impact. What are we going to do? How should we talk about this? You know, it's not a one-man band, and we try to make things work the best way. But Dominic, I appreciate you having me.
Thank you for coming down here. I really appreciate it.
I'm sure I'll be seeing you soon.
I'm sure you will. And for everybody out there, we got another great show coming up with Robin Porter, as well as
a good Facebook friend of mine.
Yes. Oh, now you made me forget the other senator that I'm supposed to have on the week afterwards. But thank you for coming out and watching. We can roll.